3 to 7 minutes late. At least that's the tradition in Shell. But we'll start off anyway. We've got 40 minutes, which isn't long. So thank you for joining the panel discussion today. Thank you to panelists and thank you to the audience. My name is Amy Challen, and I'm here as moderator of the panel. I'm the General Manager for Artificial Intelligence at Shell. And our topic today is how can partnerships and co-innovation get us to net zero? And I think we'll agree this is a big topic, and that climate change and energy transition are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, challenge that humanity faces today. So, of course, there is a lot of discussion around this and about who should be doing what. So I'm particularly pleased to welcome a panel with a huge amount of experience who go beyond the talking about it and are actually on the front line of working to deliver the energy transition. But before we ask them to introduce ourselves, just a quick comment to the audience. Please do put any questions in the chat, and we may be able to pick them up later. We'll start with the introductions and the first question, which is that you may have noticed from the full description of this panel that there's quite a strong statement made that the energy transition will not be possible without collaboration and broad coalitions. So this is quite a strong assertion. And while I think we can all recognize that this is certainly a complex issue, sometimes this kind of talk can sound like an excuse for individual players not doing what they should be doing or not doing it quickly enough. So I'd like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and at the same time say whether they agree with this, at least partly or fully, whether it's possible to do it alone. And if you don't think it's possible to do it alone, give us an example of an issue from your own area which can only be addressed in partnership. So we'll start with Ulrika.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for the ones in the North America space. So I'm Ulrika Weising. I'm heading up the Global Customer Solutions team within Shell's Renewables and Energy Solutions. And with that, I cover innovation, both B2B and B2C innovation. I cover marketing as well as our sectors, as Shell is transforming into a sector-focused organization where we're trying to do exactly what Amy was talking about, that is partnering and working with sectors and governments in order to try to help accelerate the energy transition. So that's kind of giving away my answer a little bit. I don't think we can go this alone. It's such a massive challenge that it's going to take, it's going to take more than a village. It's going to take a city to make this happen. And that goes across everything. It goes across the consumer, to the government, to corporates and organizations, because it's just such a massive challenge. And maybe an example, if you look at hydrogen as one of the solutions to the energy transition, especially when you talk about heavy-duty trucks. We couldn't go in and just build out a hydrogen fueling station network for heavy-duty trucks if there were no trucks, right? So there needs to be trucks. And then there also needs to be regulation around it to allow for this to happen. And there needs to be sufficient amount of renewables that that we need to have in order to make the hydrogen green. So it's just such a massive undertaking that it's just going to require everybody to step up and lean in.
Thanks for that, and invite Katherine to go next.
Great, thanks a lot for having me and welcome everyone. Also from my side, my name is Katherine Lehmann and I'm working at SAP, the software vendor. And I'm heading up a unit called Customer Innovation and Maintenance, which contains around 3,500 people around the globe, working on innovation topics of the software space, customer individual innovations that are not the standard solutions, but also smaller products that we want to introduce in the industry markets, and where we're trying to ensure that we are putting the right bets from a software perspective, also to link that together to our purpose. Yeah, so I personally really love to work on sustainability projects from a software perspective, because SAP has the privilege to touch 77% of all business transactions worldwide. So 77% of all business transaction, independently of what product it is, touch some kind of SAP system. Either it's an ERP system at a vendor, or a manufacturing site, or whatever. So we're having the opportunity to collect that data and make something out of it. And therefore, I think it is essential that we work in networks. We will not be able to do this alone. We cannot save the planet on our own. I mean, it's great to have people taking the lead, like Greta Thunberg and others. But in the end, we really also have to ensure that businesses focus on the right purpose and support with networks and with partnerships. Otherwise, we won't be able to achieve our goals. And this is why I'm very passionate about projects like Climate 21 that we run in SAP. We have analytics where we can really see the complete supply chain. We can track how much CO2 emission a company is needing for the complete supply chain, and topics like that you can track in our software, and you can only manage what you can measure. So therefore, I think software is absolutely needed to make this transition. And now I'm also looking forward to partnering even with some competitors like my dear colleague, Michelle.
Super. Thanks so much for that. And Michelle?
Yes, Michelle Lancaster. I'm Director of Sustainability at Microsoft. I look after a small team that is focused on building out our product portfolio and our work with customers. Often they are one and the same. We build out our product portfolio on the back of collaboration with our customers. So like Katherine, a big fan of software-enabled collaborations and transformations. And it's one of the things that we see at Microsoft in our own work. We have our own 100% renewable energy targets to reach that by 2025 to power all of our facilities, and most of that is our data centers. We also have a commitment to work with all of the energy companies and energy providers in the world to help provide that digital infrastructure and the software to drive the digital transformation of the industry. You can see pretty quickly how interdependent we are. It's very hard to build the software backbone of an industry that's transforming on a 100% renewable energy target if you don't know where the energy is, and you can't work very closely with your energy providers to provide that access. So as we're working to embed cloud solutions everywhere, we're also working to embed the right energy resources to power those in a sustainable way. So we really see across the board that despite how much desire a company or a country or an individual has, and we certainly need those, we need those pushing forward. We need to find not just the avenues of collaboration, but really the platforms that enable collaboration. And unsurprisingly, Microsoft and the rest of the panel probably agrees, given our tech backgrounds, that is a key place to start. It's one thing to be aligned on goals. It's another thing to be aligned and working together to develop the tools and platforms to get to those goals.
Thank you. And so you're saying that perhaps platforms is one of the areas which, because of the lack of joint platforms, is acting as a barrier. Are there other barriers which are getting in the way of effective collaboration in your particular area?
Yes, and if you'll indulge me, I'm going to stay on this topic of data for a second, because I think it is really important. As Katherine said, you can't measure what you can't manage. It becomes also very difficult to deploy the right resources at the right time, at the right level, to guide that energy transition evenly, which is something else that we're looking at. We've realized as we start to look at platforms, there's sort of a rush to find the right platform to collaborate, but there are some first order issues with data in this space in particular that need to be dealt with that are, depending on what side of the bed you woke up on this morning, are either blocking collaboration or really good opportunities to unlock further collaboration. One of those is granularity of data. This is something that often comes up in the climate space. We have a very good understanding of what's going on a global level, but to try to distinguish that down to an individual city or an individual country's progress on actually reducing CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, that becomes really challenging. That's equally true for energy companies, tracking methane down to an individual point source solution that's theirs and not just an atmospheric concentration. And that granularity of data, whether you're an energy company trying to reduce methane flares, or if you're a company like Microsoft that's trying to understand what kind of data we're getting in from utility providers to see if our grid is already, the grid that we're operating on is trending towards renewable energy. We just don't have the granularity of data to do that today. They're global averages. They are only delivered on a yearly basis. You're not getting the kind of real-time information that people like us crave to make real-time business decisions. So that's an opportunity where we see, with the growth in sensors and satellite information, that there's a good opportunity for open data collaboration and open data tools that can still be created in a proprietary way around proprietary data that allows companies to do what they need to do and then also share. And the second piece of that is really standardization. And we have sort of a bit of a funny topic when it comes to standardization right now that should be easy. And also no one has ever associated standards with an industry moving more rapidly, but that is exactly where we are. We have almost a proliferation of different data standards, different risk disclosures, different disclosure requirements, from voluntary frameworks all the way down to companies asking for information for their energy suppliers further in their supply chain. And so we have this sort of very abstract, chunky data that doesn't work very well to get to real-time decision making that is applied against a number of different standards. So you have apples, oranges, kumquats, sort of, but at the field level rather than what you can actually purchase at the grocery store, if you'll go with the analogy. So we think that there's really a need and to do those two things at the same time. As we continue to progress on getting better quality data, we need to actually select a couple of standards and figure out how to do that. Once we agree on the rules of the road and we're working on better data, it's going to become much easier for us to figure out where to go together most quickly with most impact.
And where are these multiple levels of standards coming from? Is it government, regulators?
It's actually not government regulation. I think you've seen this upswell of corporate action really in the past 5 to 10 years. I'm somewhat biased being here in the States, and certainly when the Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Agreement, US companies stepped to fill in. I think everyone sees a vacuum and everyone's concerned about the vacuum. And so there's a rush to fill that vacuum. And so you have sectoral standards that are starting to pop up. You have cross-industry standards that are starting to pop up. And then you have this legacy of sort of quasi-regulatory things, such as the Science-Based Standards Initiative, that are measuring things even in a slightly different way. And so if you ever wanted to, figure out how many different ways you can qualify and offset, this is a really good time to find an entry into a climate change career, because there are opportunities for you to work on standards harmonization.
And just going back to the kind of the data point. So I think there's a point about data in particular, who has access, how we can actually do it with the individual data we create as individual companies, but also sharing. But there's an intellectual property barrier quite beyond that as well. There's the data we use to measure. There's the data we use to create new technologies, especially in artificial intelligence and other areas. And it sounds like that can be a real blocker. And I'd like to think about that for a moment, because shouldn't we be adopting more radical approaches? This is one of the biggest challenges we're facing. And I'm thinking things like Joe Biden suggested that given the challenge of coronavirus, we should really be thinking about just suspending intellectual property for relevant vaccines. Now, that's been controversial and not all countries agree. But could something like that, making these technologies, making data open source, be one of the ways we can get from technological innovation to delivery quicker? I don't know if Ulrika, you've got a thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's ways of dealing with intellectual property issues, from the get-go. But I think it's something that you really need to deal with upfront, just that you get it embedded in whatever collaboration agreement or collaboration that you want to have. And I think that the things that should really be made open source are the ones that will enable companies to move faster together. And you know, one example, of course, is an initiative that we're engaged in, which is the Open Footprint Forum that we're a founding member of. And you know, that's all about making sure that the data standards that are required to help companies understand their entire global supply chains are met, and that interoperable data, you know, are essential in order to avoid, reduce, and offset those greenhouse gas emissions. So I think digital technologies can really help us overcome this burden. And I think that, as I said, those key pieces that can help us go faster, we really, I think, need to come to an agreement of the open standards that we can develop together without, you know, limiting also the individual companies to do things that is within their data proprietary as well. But I think that there's ways, and there's so many initiatives at the moment that is moving towards that, and we're seeing that in nature-based solutions as well, which is, you know, carbon offsetting, which, you know, a lot of people have different opinions about whether or not we should be doing carbon offsets or whether we need it. But in that space, there's enormous amount of effort today to just try to standardize what is an offset, how do you validate it, what is the, you know, protocol for that. But we're still ways away to get to that point. But I definitely think that kind of upfront engagement in any, whatever partnership, collaboration to deal with the IP can actually alleviate a lot of these issues, I think.
Great, thank you. And you're talking about some of the things that we need to do to get to effective sharing. So I wanted to ask actually all three of you whether you have any other tips about how to, any kind of best practices, how you enable effective partnerships, and again, any examples you have on this. I don't know, starting with Katherine, I don't know if you've got any thoughts leading on from that.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. And just adding to Ulrika's point, I absolutely agree that we need to collaborate. Nevertheless, you also need to create a win-win-win situation, right? Companies have invested many, many years into R&D and to have a competitive advantage in their space. Yeah, talking about the vaccination research and so on, and all that, for example. And I also understand those companies that they're afraid to give away that IP and also lose their competitive edge, right? So we also have to have solutions for that, and the same holds true for software solutions. Yeah. And we at SAP, we look into spaces, into cloud software spaces that where we don't have products at this point in time to solve business issues. For example, for clinical trial management. Yeah, to do the vaccination, you need to test the pharma product, and you need to do clinical trials before you can release them, right? And this is a very niche process, but needed by a lot of companies that are in the pharma space. So, for example, now we are developing a software in the cloud that enables our customers to do these clinical trials. And we develop it together with one customer. But this one customer has agreed to do a co-innovation with us that we can then onboard also other customers. And also that means they're the first movers, so they will get the software first. But also then we sell it as a product to other customers and create a new industry standard. So it's a win for that customer, it's a win for the niche industry, and it's a win for us as SAP, because we develop a new product and it's in the cloud. So from a TCO perspective, we run it for our customers, and it's not only a one-off. A one-off would be way too expensive for just one customer, so we run it for several. So we need to create this win-win-win situation. And I believe in sustainability, it's the same. I mean, most of our companies need to create revenues and want to be successful also from an economical perspective. So we have to ensure that if they have invested heavily on R&D, that somehow we bridge that when we open it up in regards to open source. So I think that's a difficulty that we still need to overcome. We have to ensure that we define very well how do we open up, how do we ensure that people have an incentive when they collaborate as well.
Super. And do you have any tips about how you make these effective partnerships work?
So usually we come together and really discuss that openly. We put it on the table and we say what needs to be done so that it's a win for each specific part of the partnership. So each party can say what they need to be successful and how they define success. And that's then basis also for contractual agreements, right?
Great. And have you experienced any particular, say, cultural barriers, clashes of processes or standards, any of you in making these trying to make these partnerships work?
Absolutely. And I mean, you see it in your own companies. The bigger your company gets, the more difficult it becomes. And you see it across companies and you see it across the world. So I think this change of company culture is one of the most difficult topics, and I love it. I mean, if you know Mr. Shine, he has put out research there, and it's easy to put new artifacts like new logos out there, but then it's more hard to change people's behavior, and then in the end to change someone's core belief is the most difficult part, right? And this is something in one company, yeah. And then if you bring different companies and different organizations together, it clashes a lot of times, right? So it is very important to bring people together who have an open mindset, who might have even lived around the world and know that their truth is not always the truth of everyone else, and that you keep an open mindset and help people to see different perspectives and then find some common ground. I think this topic is key: listening, understanding, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and then finding solutions that fit everyone.
Great. And just to invite Ulrika and Michelle, do you have any particular tips you have for how you make these partnerships work?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to get that really senior alignment first, so that it's really at the top, but there is a commitment, because I think that commitment, and if it's very public and very outspoken, it motivates the organization to make it work. So I think that's really important. And just like Katherine said, that learner mindset of just listening and understanding other and learning from others, I think is key in the people that make up the team that are trying to establish the collaboration or whatever project they're working on.
And Michelle.
Yeah, I would just chime in on, I think, 2 points there. One is, I think, the agreement about the desired outcome at the start. I think there leaves a lot of room to figure out the how, but if you know that your end goal is a moonshot around, for Microsoft getting to carbon negative by 2030. We were really clear about that goal, and that's actually spawned a number of new partnerships on the commercial side. And so I think there is this blending of corporate goals bleeding into commercial work. And I think that's a really good opportunity where you have that CEO alignment that's already public, like Ulrika mentioned, but you also have a way that you get to that triple win that Katherine mentioned, is that how do we get to those corporate goals faster while also still showing profitability? And so I think we try really hard to look at the deals that we're doing right now to think about them not just in revenue terms, but environmental terms. So if you can really pair at the outset, not at the end, which is what a lot of us have done for a really long time. It's been a COGS expense or a improvement and efficiency exercise that just happens to have sustainability benefits. We usually back calculate the CO2 at the end. If you can think about how much that reduction is happening, what you're actually speeding up in terms of time to market, while also delivering against those corporate commitments, I think that can be a really powerful incentive for companies to work together in different ways. I think the second piece is thinking expansively about that open data and ways for collaboration. It doesn't always have to be just around the collection of data or the sharing of data or the platforming of data. And I love a comment that Raphael has made in the chat. We believe really strongly in that sort of democratization, not just of data, but of best practices. We really, in the next 5 years, I don't think tech companies are going to be competing on, who is fastest to renewable energy, because we're all going to be 100% renewable. What we're going to compete on is what we're doing on the back of that increasingly green cloud. And so I think identifying some areas where there's sort of pre-competition almost, where we can actually get everybody moving a little bit more quickly, and really starting to pursue this by making sure that we're, bringing to the fore not just, all of the data that we've collected on Azure and building APIs on top of that, but also thinking really about the playbooks that we've had of how do you get a CEO to commit to sucking carbon out of the atmosphere by 2050 when there are currently not tools on the market to do that. How do you, start to transform the organizations so you can transform the way that organization interacts with the rest of the world? I think those are two really big pieces that tend to get, they're a little more org psychology than data driven, but they're really precursors to having effective partnerships and effective data platforms as well.
And also publishing it on your balance sheet. So what SAP is doing, for example, for years already, is really publishing those sustainability goals on our balance sheet, encouraging others to do the same. So also that the stock market can see and value that. And I think also from that perspective, things will change and will also help us to accelerate on that transformation.
Great. And just to pick up on a comment Katherine made, which she said, people who worked all around the world are often the people who realize just the way they do things is not the only way. I wonder if anyone had any other tips about how to identify the kind of people we should be putting forward for collaboration and how to get to that learner mindset.
Michelle?
I always I think about the dreamers and the doers, and you need both. You need and it's great when they're the same person, often not, but you need the dreamers in those groups, the people that show up to that first meeting and say, what if we were to develop a thing that cut global greenhouse gas emissions by 20%? They have no idea how to get there, but they're going to be that sort of fire starter in that discussion group, and to really push people to think big. And then you need somebody that's the doer that says, okay, how are we practically going to go ahead and do those things? I think it is, we look for the people, and I know this now sounds maybe a bit like Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers in these situations, but I think often the things that we're taught as children tend to be very true when it comes to collaboration across companies. And finding those helpers, the people that really want to go fast, combined with the people that are just, excellent at finding and driving outcomes in alignment. We really look at people and culture when we think about these partnerships too. It's it is hard to be partnered with people that don't want to go as fast or in the same direction as you. And that doesn't mean that we only partner with like-minded folks, but you've got to find the right channels in those organizations to actually be able to drive it, because they exist. There are dreamers and doers in every organization.
That's true. And it's especially important to align people around a common goal and to really set that at the beginning with the dreamers and the doers together, and then align around that and have people running into the same direction. And I think that's the most powerful then.
Yeah, and also Devin's comment here as well, don't underestimate the people who has an arts degree or has an art background, because I think sometimes, if you're a very engineering heavy organization like Shell, we kind of forget the values of that creativity that comes from people with a different background and that diversity. And I think, when we talk about diversity in this kind of context, it's really that diversity of thought that we need to go for and try to encourage. And that means bringing in people with different backgrounds and different skill sets and having that mix of people. And then, like Katherine said, then aligning everybody about what is the North Star that we're aiming at getting to as a collaboration or project.
Great tips. I think, unfortunately, I'm more of a doer. But I know that it's a 10-year academic career that trained me to always think of all the problems before I think of the opportunity, and I'm trying to get out of it still. But I definitely like matching up with dreamers because, yeah, they can have the vision, I can execute. And are there areas where we think in your respective areas there are partnerships and collaborations we desperately need, but which are just not yet in place? So that's a good one for Ulrika, given your new energies area.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Apologies. Areas where there are partnerships and collaborations we need, which are not yet in place.
Oh, there's so many. There, this is of course cogX, so there's very focused on technology and data and digital. And I think that already in that space, there's a strong need to come together even further on open standards and the compatibility between different systems in order to allow for more wider, deployment and implementation of new ideas and new ways of getting to, reducing carbon emission and advancing the energy transition. I also think that we need to think about collaboration also from a geographical perspective. I think that we aren't really doing yet. And it kind of gets to Michelle's point before about granularity of data, because it's linked, but we also need to think about this as a global challenge, right? And we come from, from the Western world, and we've had the privilege of polluting the world for a long time. And other countries who are earlier on in their journey, how can we help them transition quicker, maybe skip some steps that we did? Maybe we can skip coal somewhere. Maybe we can go directly to gas instead of, or even directly to renewables. Let's even skip gas, right? So I think that those type of collaborations, I think we need to see more of, where we also think about this really as a global challenge. I also think that we need to sometimes think outside of the box of, we're an oil and gas company, right? But we're 100% dedicated to this energy transition, and we know we need to transform in order to get there. But sometimes, there's people that might not be so willing to work with us because we're an oil and gas company, despite the fact that we need everybody's help and support as well on this challenge, because the demand for oil and gas products that comes across all of our lives, chemicals, everything that you have in your kitchen, is based on oil and gas products, basically. So it needs to come with a strong focus on how can we change the demand picture, because without the demand picture, there's going to be oil and gas being continued to be produced across the globe, right? So how can we work on that type of collaboration? And that is collaboration with governments, with institutions, with public opinions on what we need to do as individuals to help with the energy transition. So yeah, so I'm not specifying a specific one, but there's just such a plethora of needs of collaboration that we need to really look up and beyond. It's like raising our gaze and see where can we find those collaborations that can really make an impact globally.
I don't know if, Katherine, you've got any other examples of collaborations that you think are really needed?
So from my perspective, we need to make it as easy as possible for the end users or the consumers to do the right thing. Yeah. And this is something that we can do in the background, so to say, and really helping the complete supply chain to do the right things based on regulation, but also based on incentives. So so making it easy for the consumers to not even think about their choices is the thing to do. And there we have to be smart. We have to come together and really think about, okay, how can we make it easiest for the consumers to do the right decisions? And what does it need from a end-to-end supply chain perspective to make that happen? And at SAP, we use design principles, and we come together and brainstorm and work on joint solutions. And Devin here in the chat also said sometimes it's best to put people into such a design thinking space that have very opposite backgrounds, because then people really start to try to understand each other from scratch and don't hide between abbreviations and acronyms and the expert language, right? So I think these design thinking spaces are really powerful if you put in the right people from all the different angles, and then just put one goal out there. You need to design an easy solution for the consumers to reduce their carbon footprint, right? So very generic, and then putting people and brainstorm together and come out with different products, software products, oil and gas products, hardware products, whatever it is that is needed along the way.
Michelle, you have anything?
Amy, I might just chime in briefly because I know we're coming to the end, but I do think there's been this concept, I think, a bit that has been coming out in the comments around better aligning supply and demand. I think that there's this deep desire for a faster energy transition that's shared from Shell to the UK government, all the way, to the Biden administration, all the way down to individual consumers that are concerned about this. It's really about how do you take all of that aggregate sort of wish for change and convert it into stable demand signals that can translate into companies making those financial decisions around changing supply and doing that in a real way. And I think that signal is, we see a signal and a desire for change, but really being able to convert that into supply and demand is something that is just, the market is not catching up, I think, as fast as we're seeing change. We've seen that already. I mean, we put out a RFP for 1 million tons of carbon removal. We would really love to have that be increasingly engineered solutions in the back end rather than just nature-based solutions. There's a tremendous demand and need for engineered carbon removal solutions, yet the availability of them on the market is very, very nascent right now. They're incredibly expensive. And so we think that those lines will flatten out, but I think right now it is, as Ulrika said, how do we think about this from a global perspective and flatten those curves so we get things that look like the solar acceleration, but in an even more compressed time frame? Because I think that's the thing that is, again, depending on what side of the bed you woke up on, terrifying or really exciting, because we do not have a lot of time to get going and to do it well. I think that brings back to the last point that I wanted to make here is the role of finance. I think we've talked about governments. We haven't really talked about the role of finance. And I think there's an incredibly important opportunity. And I think investors and asset owners are really eager to try to do the right thing. I think they are very confused as to what the right thing looks like here. Is it to, cut off funding for energy companies? Should they work with those companies to help them transition? And they're thinking about impact investment. Where do you actually invest for the most impact? And, those are all data questions, but they're also the nature of collaboration and really understanding, do you need the carrot? Do you need the stick? I think with everything that we've talked about, it's always an and both. Should it be open source or proprietary? Like, yes. The answer is yes across the board. It's a question of what technique is necessary at the right time. And so I do think as we're working through all of this, closer collaboration with the finance sector, which has had sectoral-led initiatives, but has been a little loath to engage in some of the other initiatives. That's a place that I think is really ripe for collaboration, especially when we think about a just energy transition and making sure this doesn't just work for grids in the US and Western Europe, but is really providing energy access and reliable, affordable energy to everyone. And that's really what we're going to need. Otherwise, we're just going to end up with a K-shaped recovery on energy transition as well.
Thank you. And again, the data theme is coming up again with technology appropriate for cogX. And so any closing remarks from any of the
And maybe I'll go. So SAP is trying to be carbon neutral by end of 2023. So we're really trying to lead by example, and we're trying to help each and every individual company to track their own footprints, to make that traceable and to ensure that they can measure how success looks like for them. And I really like the idea to have a consumer app that tracks the footprint of each and every consumer. So I will take that into my innovation team here. So someone put that in the chat. So thanks very much for having us. Thanks for this inspiring panel. It was great to speak with Michelle and Ulrika, and also you, Amy. Thanks for moderating us. It was a pleasure. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you. And Ulrika?
Yeah, I concur with what Katherine said, and I just think that we need to come together in these type of discussions more often, and because I think it's a stepping stone of also telling the rest of the world about partnerships that we're doing, but also an opportunity to just connect. And Katherine was saying before we went live today, it was too bad that we couldn't do this in person, and I couldn't agree more, because aren't we all missing that human interaction a little bit? And hopefully next year we can all meet in cogX in person and sit on a stage and have this discussion instead. But thanks everyone. Thanks Katherine. Thanks Michelle, and thank you Amy for keeping us in check and moving us along.
And Michelle, anything final comments?
Yeah. I would just close with, I think you called it out at the beginning, Amy. Collaboration is not a dirty word. It is not a fig leaf. It is a way of life. And I think that it is really, we've seen in the past 3 years that it is paired with these really strong corporate commitments, that collaboration is now a way of expressing those rather than excusing those. And I think that that is something that those on the front lines that have set those ambitions, just as much as you're working with your partners to find new commercial opportunities, work with your suppliers to get them on board, work with those that are bringing along, it's probably appropriate a all female panel to, we talk about sort of, not taking the ladder up after you. And I think that that's particularly apt in this space. It is hard going for those of us that are on the front lines of doing this work. It's expensive, but the more that we can collaborate to bring up not only ourselves, but bring up the next sort of generation, the Fortune 1000 along with the Fortune 500, the better we'll be. So I think it's embrace the collaboration, but push hard and keep dreaming and doing, because we've got a lot of work to do in about 9 years.
That's true.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks to the panelists. Thank you for the lively chat going on. And thank you for cogX for hosting us. And I wish you all an excellent rest of the day and to enjoy the next few days of the conference. And I hope to see you in person next year. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.